Hi, this is Kasim, and I wanted to take another attempt to approach the mystery of astrology and address its importance to our time. Because our scientific community has hit a brick wall, essentially, with their understanding of hyperphysics, of physicality, of the physical world, our world. They've hit a brick wall because their understanding is limited to the world of sensory. It's limited to their language. It's limited to their ability to draft concepts that stretch the imagination in ways that are uncomfortable for the empirical mind, the scientific mind, the mind that requires proof of everything. And one of the interesting things about the ancients is that they possessed a language that, as opposed to deconstructing the world by extrapolating truth from what was untrue by the perspective, the ancients possessed a form of language that, because of their understanding of things and their understanding of forces, they were able to draw parallels between two ideas based on their math, based on their physics, based on archetypal forces, based on very physical things that we can relate to. The color, the emotion it carries, how it sounds. But they had a system of understanding that was able to draw parallels between things in a way that allowed them to be grouped together. It was called the law of correspondences. Their languages were based on universal truths, higher concepts, concepts rooted in physics, but concepts that were extremely true and allowed them to understand things, the sciences from a different perspective than our own. They were able to understand the way something worked based on what it had in common with other things. It was a correspondence, a system of correspondences. It's called the law of correspondences, actually. And if you ever read the Hermes, the tablets of Hermes Trismegistus, I think it's the tablets of Thoth. Maybe the tablets of Thoth, but I know there are, in the Kabbalion, there are Hermetic laws, and they're just universal laws. They're truths about the way things, about the way energy works. So their language permitted them to understand all things by what they had in common. And it was all a breakdown of what energy was doing. See, they understood the universe by energies, light. They knew everything was light. It was all energy and light. And they had an entire language system. And this is all the ancient languages, all the languages, ancient cultures, actually. The languages of these cultures utilized the law of correspondences to understand the greater universe from the microcosm. They were able to understand the macrocosm from the microcosm. And in astrology, we still have access to some degree to that body of science, even though we're missing a great deal of the language to explain the modality of energy and the elements and what they're really doing. So we're sort of reaching in the dark to resurrect this body of knowledge so it can be brought into the light and digested by the mainstream scientific community, so we can evolve our understanding of hyperphysics, natural laws and the higher laws, and you know, our existence, our reason in being here, our relationship with the world. You know, there's so many questions, and it seems that in science, you know, the more questions they answer, the more questions they come up with. And that's because they keep dividing things and separating things to understand how they relate based on how they're separate. But the more you break something down, the more bits you'll have. So we need to find a way to group things together. And, you know, they've developed these new bodies of science, which are like, you know, you have the theory of everything, right? Grain unification theory and whatnot. They're trying to find a one-size-fits-all platform through which to explain everything. And there is. It's astrology, essentially. It's all the occult sciences. You know, you get into astrology, you break down all the different modalities of energy and what the proton and the electrons are doing and how they relate to the mind, how they influence the mind, how the protons chasing the electrons, or, you know, one subatomic particle chasing another is just a representation of a masculine principle that is attracted to the feminine principle. Or it's also it correlates to why there's this magnetic attraction to things that we hold to be in opposition to us, or to forces that perplex us in some way, that make us curious. They draw our curiosity, and it forces us to engage. And it's actually a natural form of magnetism that goes all the way back to the physics of how these subatomic particles move, what urges them. And I have prepared a body of work, some of which is written, some of which I'll be ad-libbing, some very crude pictures to demonstrate in a very crude way, but for the scientific mind, you know, how we can view astrology from a way that allows us to take it further, to release it from the bonds of mysticism and bring it into the light, where the scientific community and the community of occultists, and I hate to use the word occult. Occult really just refers to something that's hidden. The idea is we want this to be demystified so it isn't seen as something that's evil, because it's just it's an understanding. It really is the understanding of everything. It's the theory of everything, can really be viewed through the lens of astrology. And astrology, again, it's just really a breakdown of the sciences, the stars, the physics, the movements of energy and of matter, and the archetypes. Really, it's a very important thing, is understanding archetypes, because our grasp of concepts related to the mind and of mental disease and growth are very stunted, because we believe ourselves to be creating a lot of the emotions and a lot of the you know, not just the emotions, but the ideas that we come up with, the emotions we generate. We're really just channeling these energies, or they're forms of energy that we channel, because we're functioning on a bandwidth. And within that bandwidth, we're given the ability to express ourselves to a certain degree with free will. And without belaboring it anymore, like I said, I've prepared a body of work, and some of it's written. I'll be ad-libbing where I can, and it's a very crude production. So when I shift the camera, you'll actually see where I've written, you know, what I've written, actually. So if you prefer, you can, you know, follow along. But most importantly, I think, are the drawings and the illustrations I've provided, just to succinctly draw an illustration, a perspective that allows me to weave your thinking in a way that breaks this information down so again, without belaboring, I've drafted, I prepared some work. There's some illustrations. There's something I'll be reading. And because this is a very crude production, you'll actually see what I've written. If you prefer, you can follow along with what I'm reading. And I may ad-lib from time to time because, at the time I wrote a lot of this stuff, and I'll admit, in some cases I was just extremely tired. Some of it's very redundant. The ideas aren't very clear. I just wanted to get it out while it came to me. We are tapping into a greater reality. We're tapping into higher intelligences. We're tapping into energy forms. And again, when you realize it's the photon that is expressing its creativity in this world through matter, and through the elements, and creating us as a representation of the most difficult, the most masterful construct of all, which is we, who are the microcosm of this matrix, are given the ability to express ourselves within a certain bandwidth of a certain range of free will, and that range is the Roy G. Biv spectrum. So here I have some things I've prepared. You can follow along, and again, there's some illustrations, and please forgive me if any of this sounds a little redundant, or if you may encounter something that I'm reading and I go over it and say it a different way. But again, it's just for me. This was written at a time for me to get it out so that I could, so that it was out, so I could actually explain it again later in a way that was very quick and easy to digest for, again, the scientific mind. Well, all right. You remember this guy, Osmosis Jones? It was a cartoon movie done by Chris Rock. And I chose this picture because it's a good representation of how, from the perspective of ourselves, they being, lesser forms of us, each carrying our biological signature, a magnetic signature that identifies them as a part of our body. So if any of our cells invaded another host, or ever found their way in another host, that host would be aware that these cells did not originate with it. It may treat some of them as foreign bodies and may attack them. And it's because every cell in our body carries an electromagnetic signature that identifies it as a part of our body. So this was a really good movie to depict how we are not, well, really what we think we are. We are essentially a singularity of living organisms that are each living and breathing and experiencing their world subjectively. And, together they make us up. And it's a very interesting thing, but, my name being Kasim, I'm actually Kasim, but I'm also 50 trillion other organisms that not necessarily call themselves Kasim, but they are of Kasim. And they exist in a universe all their own. Just like in this movie, they ran around all through this movie, and by all accounts, they crossed rivers and hills and valleys and really an entire world, and they never left the human body, the host of the person all this took place in. So what is a singularity? I want you to imagine that you're not a single entity, but a collection of nanoscopic entities, existing in a vast community of interconnecting systems, each with their own energy signature, function, and agenda. To their perspective, these microscopic entities view you as a living universe, which they're all connected to, receive their orders from, coordinate with to communicate to other various entities which do not speak the same language, and send information back to the brain for the evolution of your singular form and genetic material. This communication is conducted by extremely subtle currents of electricity and waves of electromagnetism that carry information in the form of intent. This intent is their truth. That's very important, as it's true for them to live and die as they will to support your growth in every manner possible. As a single entity, you are, to yourself, a singularity. And what's a singularity? It's technically a particle that exists without polarity, force, or intent. It's holistic, complete, and hermetic, and in harmony with itself. In other words, there's no division or conflict within it, because as a singularity, it must remain monolithic of thought, form, and function to remain self-sustaining. Because anything at war with itself is doomed. I forget, I think it was Carl Sagan who said that. Any organism at war with itself is doomed. And it's very true. The term particle is only symbolic to describe a single unit of something. A group of particles may come together to create something new, just as a group of molecules create elements. A group of cells make up a body, and a group of people make up a community. The term particle is irrelevant, and it's simply a thing that contains within itself all that's required for homeostasis. It's self-sustaining, and perfect homeostasis is the idea that nothing else is required to keep it functioning. And you can think of the human body as an example of that. If, technically it didn't require shelter, food, or water, which can go without these things for a period of time. But by all accounts, it's, the human body is considered homeostatic because without the very basic necessities it requires from external sources, it, by all accounts, has everything it needs within it to maintain a form of homeostasis. So, what does it have to do with me? What does that have to do with me? Good question. When subject to friction, conflict, or turmoil, a singularity must deplete its potential to resist the vicissitudes of environmental change by evolving to adapt to the conflict. This is likened to the human body, as it must exist in a world where all things are forced to adapt to change. The movement of the sun across the sky changes the heat index and gives predators an advantage in the darkness. The movement of the earth around the sun changes the weather and the seasons. The body must adapt as it grows to become more suited to the shifting environment. This is evolution. In order to grow, a singularity must be subject to conflict. Let's see. This is the same for the human body, the mind, the emotions, and the spirit. We don't grow or evolve without conflict. There has to be a perceived limitation, and that's the function of Saturn. Saturn is what restricts light, restricts the flow of force or light because of its gravity. It imposes a restriction that slows light, and it gives us sort of this matrix for light to build itself on. It's what provides the architecture of light for the archetypes to paint themselves onto. I know that's abstract, but again, that'll be in my that'll be in my work, where you get to see how the archetypes actually come through into our reality through these constructs, through this matter. We're just basically looking at the archetypal forces existing in a form that makes sense to us, and we interact with these things. But they still maintain their value. They still impose on us in a way that the archetypes do. Like, for instance, red makes you lustful, makes you angry. The frequency red, for instance, the mood red. You could, if somebody asked you to demonstrate what you feel like the color red does to you through a song, you could easily produce a song that you feel like perfectly expresses your understanding or your idea of the color red, and that's based on archetypes. So, yes, we are a singularity, and let's see here. So, yes, so is anything with the ability to achieve homeostasis, and I'm going back to my what I've written. As all things are made of smaller particles working together to achieve the homeostasis of their collective form, inside of a singularity, all particles have the ability to utilize their energy or special abilities that make them unique in a constructive or deconstructive way. For instance, a particle may be, it may move upward, downward, inside, or out. All of which can be seen as a positive or negative thing, depending on the perspective of the other particles. But to their collective form, the singularity, it's all the same and it's necessary for growth. The singularity utilizes the natural magnetism of conflict by perspective to achieve the polarity in a mysterious way I'll cover more in a moment. And what I was illustrating here with the plates is how perspective shapes our reality, because you can view these plates from two different perspectives, and that creates two different truths. So from one perspective, all the plates are turned over. But the odd thing is, the moment you identify them, the plates flip around, and then they're right side up. But it's all based on your perspective. Your perspective paints your truth. And this is because the photon itself, which is self-aware, is doing the same thing. I mean, it's the mechanics of consciousness and awareness are created by perspective. They're altered and they evolve by perspective, and that is it's an archetypal thing that goes all the way back to the position of the proton, and it's the position of the not the proton, the position of the particle, or the building block of reality, the photon, the particle, the atom, whatever you want to call it, whatever it is that's vibrating, that's building, that's being used as the material for creation. It's actually the photon. It's by the perspective of the photon that we get, the breakdown of geometry. When we're drawing geometric patterns, it's all really based on the angles that we see from a top-down view. But you gotta wonder how reality is actually being created. I mean, what is it that's creating these angles? How is it that we have angles? What is it that is, by its own perspective, able to move from itself to another distance to actually create an angle relative to itself? What set in motion the rules for all of that? It's like, what is... If we didn't come up with geometry, what did? Because something is making angles, and these angles are perfect, and they appear over and over and over again in our reality. And by these angles, we get geometry. From the geometry, we get planes, we get dimensions, we get math. From that math, we get movement, we get polarity, we get alternating current, we get the shifting of force. We get a breakdown of the different frequencies, and because of the frequencies, we get a breakdown of the colors, and by the breakdown of the colors, we get a breakdown of emotions, the emotional range, the emotional bandwidth. You look at someone at an MRI, you can actually see from their their collective color, actually, their auric field, what they call. There's a color that, based on your mood, your body collectively produces. When we get better with it, we'll actually notice that there are 7 bands within the body, seven magnetic centers that energy moves through, and of course those are the chakras. But here, what I'm showing is the angle of the frequency. It's the angle of light, which gives us the breakdown of everything. It's from this wheel here that we can see how light is dividing itself. It's creating planes with the 90-degree angle here. From here being Aries, everything beginning in Aries. The time of Aries represents the spring, right? The time of Aries represents 6 a.m. The time of Aries represents the time that you wake up. So it's sort of the dawn of consciousness. It's the time that the sun breaks over the horizon and begins its ascent toward Leo. And what we're watching is consciousness. It's an intent. It's the measurement of an actual of an event that is intended to complete itself through a cycle, but through its process of completion, there are so many other potentials that are unfolding and are made possible through its unfolding. So here is the actual zodiac, is what we're looking at, right? And we get all of our archetypal, our understanding of archetypal forces, of the archetypes, the ones that we're given, which is, Aries and Taurus and Gemini and Cancer and Leo, and you have Virgo and Libra, Scorpio. Really quite interesting, actually. So if you could consider yourself the sun being the masterwork of the atom, the masterwork of the particle, which is what sustains this entire matrix. And from the position of the sun as it breaks over the horizon, there is a collective awareness that exists as the sum of all particles on this planet. It is a living field, and it's made up of all of the collective particles on this planet, just like we're made up of all the collective particles that exist in our body. All right, so first you must be willing to expand your view of what's possible, obviously. And then you consider that light and awareness are one. And the same thing, because light is information. Information brings clarity. Light brings clarity. Information bestows enlightenment. To enlighten means to be free of the burden of restriction. So when restricted, a strong enough light will intensify until it overcomes the restriction and continues on its path. We understand in physics that all things we can see are made of some form of light, condensed to form matter. Matter is the material of creation. The Egyptians referred to it as ma'at, and it is intelligent because it obeys laws that keep it in check and allow it to build and destroy. Light is made of subatomic particles referred to as protons. Again, I'm being redundant, but I think it's a bit more cogent this way. Axiomatically, there is a collective intelligence in coordination with itself that is utilizing the photon to create and destroy. There's a fascinating scripture in the Bible that hints toward this truth. It's Isaiah 45:7. It says, I form the light and create the darkness. And I'm talking like Jehovah, right? I form the light and create darkness. I bring prosperity and create disaster. I am Ehehie. Or Jehovah. Yahweh am the one who does these things. God, I'm a terrible God. So I form the light and create darkness. I bring prosperity and create disaster. I, Yahweh, am the one who does these things. And there's a reason why they left out vowels back in the old days, the languages of old, and they stuck with consonants, because they knew that by adding vowels to their words, they created a sine wave, a reverberation in time that carried their intent forth. So by speaking the name of God with vowels, they were invoking God through the sine wave. They were creating God in the world through their intent, through their speech, and they understanding how matter makes its way down from higher planes down into reality. Our intent actually manifests in time and space through the cross of force and form, through the zodiac. So by speaking God's name and adding the vowels, you create this sine wave of intent that manifests in the world in some form that you've evoked God through, that better be beneficial, because you use this name in vain and you use it in order to evoke curses on others. Oddly enough, the way the law of rhythm works, yeah, you kind of get where I'm going, but that's kind of the way it works. It's a bit deeper than that, but when you add vowels to something, it creates a reverberation. It actually draws the intent down into time and space through the word, W-Y-R-D, the creative electromotive force of intent. It's that same intent that, oddly enough, the observer effect, when you're viewing particles, they notice they're being observed because it's the particle, the photon itself, that is reacting to itself through resonance. It knows. And then intent is carried when you view something. When you view a thing, there is a very subtle current of electricity that is emitted. There's an old saying that where attention goes, power flows. So here, I've given another depiction of perspective. And you can see, based on whatever perspective, the perspective of the sun, you get, and I hate when I drew this, there was little regard for the axis, and I think some astrologers and even some astronomers are probably gonna hurt me over this, because there are a few things wrong here, and if you can't tell what it is, then maybe that's a good thing. But this is just to provide you with an idea of the breakdown of atomic cycles, the breakdown of the atomic minute, the seasons, a breakdown of consciousness, actually. So you get all things actually, and if you go into the work of Mr. Santo Spinacci, he has a a body of work he refers to as astrotheology, and it's very good to really explain the cycles of time and consciousness. So just to go over it very quickly, you have a breakdown, and based on perspective, you have opposing forces. Aries is opposed to Libra, right? Cancer, or rather Leo here, is opposed to Capricorn. And it's very crudely done. Good grief. But, you get an idea. And again, right now, it isn't important to understand the exact position of these things, these houses. But from here, what I want you to take stock of is, based on perspective, what is opposed to what? Because you have, based on this wheel, dichotomy. You have duality. You have light and dark. You have summer and winter. You have spring and fall. You have 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. You have 12 noon and 12 midnight. You have, where you're awake during the day and you're asleep at night, because here's midnight down here and here's 12 a.m. at the rise, the dawn of consciousness. The days tend to be longer here and shorter here, right? You get the Passover into the spring, and then, you cross back over into the fall, and here's, based on this perspective here, this being the ecliptic of the world, if this were the ecliptic when the sun rises over the dawn, you can see that the houses of Scorpio and so forth sort of fall into the dark areas. They're the darkness, where they are considered to be of the dark forces, essentially. They take place in the fall and in the winter, and that's when life is more difficult. That's when predators come out. That's when you struggle, when you have to fight to survive, when the sun isn't able to make things as pleasant as it typically would in the summer. The winter and fall seasons tend to be a bit more harsh. So because of that harshness they impose on the consciousness, they are seen as things that are evil or malefic, in a sense. So I'm going to go into this in another time. I didn't want to belabor this now, but this is all based on occult stuff, and it's just a division of, based on perspective, how you get a division of these archetypal forces and how they impose on the mind. And it's really about the atomic minute, the atomic hour, the atomic day, the atomic seasons. It's all based on the cycle. And this may be a better depiction, of course, of that. You have 6 a.m., right? You have Taurus and Gemini, and then it goes all the way around, and then Libra, and then it crosses into the fall, and then the winter, and then the spring, and then the summer. And this is also a depiction of an hour, right? Like the sun, or rather not the sun, but our, you have the hours, you have the seconds, you have the days. I'm not really thinking straight, but I don't want to beat this up too much. Sometimes I tend to explain things to where I feel like I'm satisfied with how much information is given, so that I feel like there are no questions. I want to cover all questions, but I feel like sometimes I may end up creating more questions. So the singularity of this corporate light body is expressing itself to create and destroy. It's the purpose of its own evolution, and to spread its own awareness by expressing all of the potential within it to achieve homeostasis in a shifting cosmos of greater violence, most of which, thankfully, is far enough so that we'll never have to worry about a neighboring supernova taking us out, right? So for simplicity, we'll call a corporate light body a living matrix, where the material changes state to process the forces within it, to alter its collective form. So, again, when you're looking at a chart like this, you can actually get a depiction of what I mean by force and form. What is force? Force is a wave of some form, right? A vibration. Something comes along to disturb matter that exists in a state of rest. And here it identifies, this sine wave pattern as an electromagnetic wave propagating in the direction Z, right? That's that line, that pole I drew earlier. And that is the representation of the form. The force is coming down, crossing it, and that's the force, and the form is what is being penetrated. So very crudely, you can see the depiction of force, this here, and form, which is this being the form, the ground, the water, whatever. And form is earth and water, right? That's form. That is matter existing in a state of form. So we perceive it as elements because that's what it takes for us to understand what it's doing, what matter is doing. It's taking a form. So by our account, it has to take the form of either earth or water to assume form. Fire and air are what matter is doing when it is channeling force. So you have the marriage of force and form, that is fire and air moving through earth and water. Here, and fire, of course, and there are different types of forces, because fire is just really a chaotic force, an explosive force, a strong force, right? Can't be contained. Air, you can blow. I mean, you can contain fire, but it really sort of wants to do whatever it wants to do, right? And you feed fire, and it moves based on the available fuel, whatever is there that can be borrowed to support it, to feed it. So from the perspective of the atom, in a state of quantum superposition, it's able to see where it is, where it's going. It notices itself in different places, and it's based on that architecture of its superposition that it's able to build the geometry, create the geometry that weaves our matrix. It weaves the web, and by its perspective, we get breakdowns of dichotomies, and it's all based on perspective. Dichotomy is all based on perspective. We have masculine and feminine. We have noon and midnight. Based on noon, if you were standing on the top of the planet, or rather, if you were the sun and you were looking at the people below, you would consider, those beneath the ecliptic as those living in darkness. And so archetypally, those who live in darkness, wherever you are, exist as, consider something that's opposed to the sun, something that couldn't live in the sunlight. Whenever the sun was at 12 noon, it would have to be there somewhere away from the sun, right, to hide from it, underneath a tree or some shade or something. But I guess the safest place, obviously, would be the other side of the planet. But the whole idea is it's all perspective. It's and this is the light of perspective, as you can see here, is the shadow of perspective. So in the shadow of perspective, you have where the subconscious mind, or the background sort of operating system of the mind, it's the things of darkness. You have the things of light and the things of darkness. And because we live in a patriarchy, we consider the masculine aspect of something, the direct or electric aspect of something, to be the good perspective. It's the light, where the receptive, receding, magnetic aspect of it. Like, for instance, we consider in the Bible for a woman who is magnetic, because of her magnetism, she's considered wicked because she lures, right? Her sexuality lures us. It's something that is it's vexing to men. It grabs their attention, and because of the there's an opposing force there that man feels compelled to subdue, where it's really his own weakness. It's our own vulnerability that compels us to subdue where we are not, to spread ourselves and establish our power or our authority in places where we are lacking control. It's that impetus that directs the flow of electricity. It's the actual the presence of a vacuum or a void of conditions that creates the magnetic lure that draws energy toward it, or draws focus, draws curiosity, draws attention, light toward it. And of course here you get the breakdown of, top and bottom, masculine, feminine, hot and cold, red and blue, something moving forward, something receding, right? And here it is again in 3 dimensions, right? And in 1 dimension. And this is really what we're looking at, right? This is what we're looking at. It's this baby here. Same thing. Have you noticed? The shifting sine wave pattern is really just this, winding its way. Now this is a sine wave. It's a measurement of force crossing form, or force being asserted into or through a form, taking the shape of elements to transmute it, and that's how we interpret what matter is doing when it's vibrating. So the ancients referred to this solar system as the reflection of an even greater body, the galaxy. The solar system to them was an intelligent matrix of lesser superpowers, the lesser gods, at the center of which was the sun, also referred to as the Messiah, because it's the highest source of light, and therefore the truth, the light of the world, which saves us with its healing energy and lifeblood, and can be seen triumphantly as the storm is banished, walking across the still waters and casting its reflection with its corona, its crown of thorns. The sun also reveals the truth, makes war against the darkness, and creates a life journey which begins its greatest work around noon and in the summer when the days are longest, to symbolically die in the winter when the days are shortest. It is the master builder of all material in the corporate solar system matrix, and it also traverses the sky in a 360-degree orbit, which is divisible by 12 parts, which can said to be its companions by allegory. In the Bible, what's a little known secret and known to us in the hidden schools are that the 12 zodiac signs are actually depictions of the followers of the Messiah. They are the apostles of the Messiah. It's for a reason. It's a bit deep, and I'm not going to go into it now, but it's based on archetypes again. Where did I leave off here? The master builder material in the corporate solar matrix, also divisible by 12 parts, said to be its oh yeah, sorry about that. The sun itself, I should edit this. The sun itself is another matrix of living light that powers the solar system with gravitational influence that bestows all matter and force and sets all things into motion. Wondering if I said that right. All things in this corporate solar system matrix are a product of the sun's power and were born from its source. It is the source of this matrix. All things were crafted of the material emitted by the sun and cooked in our Earth, essentially, or cooked by all the luminaries here in the matrix in this solar system. They each coalesced into different forms, which were representations of other archetypal forces that interfere with this matrix, to keep it going. It helps produce the homeostasis that we need to keep things moving. The sun itself, let's see, all things in this corporate blah 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 blah. Also a microcosm of its likeness. It is also a microcosm, I apologize, of its likeness, the source of the galactic center, which is an even greater matrix. It was made in the image of its progenitor, and I believe that is the dog star, Sirius. I believe we orbit the dog star, but if I'm not mistaken, our matter, the matter of our system, came actually from Sirius. The Bible refers to astrology. Oh, the biblical references actually to astrology are overwhelming, and they are. There are many, and as I've mentioned here, I'm going to reserve these deeper lessons for the mystery school, because there's so much information to cover. Really, like it can't be done all in 1 or 2 or even 10. Honestly, videos, you go into the different signs and what they mean, the different angles and the archetypes and what they mean to us and what they mean in general, because this stuff exists whether we're here or not. We're just channeling these powers. But no matter how many times human beings come back, or even if animals grew up and grew intelligent and began walking and building societies, there would be an aspect of their behavior and the way they conduct themselves that is based on light. They're expressing the light. They are the light, and they're just expressing it through their uniqueness. But the light maintains certain qualities that are going to come about in any, like a heartbeat or pulse. That's essential. The heartbeat, the pulse, the rotation, not the rotation, but the cycles of its consciousness, because all things must rest. They must have periods of rest and periods of activity. There are periods where, and then of course they need to function in a way where they can exist in in an environment that's also changing. That's very important, that their corporate form is able to evolve, just as the corporate form of the world evolves as it moves through space and is subject to space weather and other electromagnetic forces that impress upon its field and change the states of matter here, change the weather, shift the seasons, move the heat index, they move the jet streams, builds new matter. Our magnetopause weakens and then it strengthens, and then sometimes the earth allows the sun to seed it, and it takes that matter and cooks it. Sometimes it's not ovulating, right? It doesn't want the seed of the sun, and it wants to just sort of hunker down, and its cells need to be prepared for that. But that's the whole homeostasis pattern, that the perfection of the system, and it's all because it's from the perspective of the atom. Not the atom, but the actual photon, that all of this is being built. It understands and sees everything, so it intuitively knows the math that it needs to create and continue on with that homeostasis. So, as above, so below, right? We're miniature solar systems moving around in a corporate form necessary to traverse the waters of this feminine light matrix called Gaia. It is feminine, and that it is receptive to the light of the sun. This holds an even deeper mystery, also reserved for the mystery school, but astrology shows us our energetic structure. With the heart of the body as the source, right? Where we have the heart of the body. Here corresponds where? To Leo. That is the pump, the heart. That is the heart of this system is the sun. The sun is at the position of the height, right? The height of the crest, the height of the pulse. That's why in the occult, or in astrology, the sun Leo usually refers to people who are infused with the energetic qualities of Leo, meaning they have planets that at the time they were born were in the house of Leo, and these planets carry these luminaries carry these unique magnetic signatures that process they respond to the magnetic signatures of these collective astrological body, these constellations. So each of these constellations being a light source, emitting their light, they actually impose on our field in a very orderly way, because from our perspective there is a 360-degree view, and within that division of 12, from our 360-degree perspective of the ecliptic, we perceiving the light of each of these these constellations, we're subject to their magnetic field. You know, whenever you see the light of something, you can rest assured that you're also being bathed in its electromagnetism. That's what carries the light. It's the electromagnetic field. You're just receiving the electromagnetic field, which you perceive to be the light. But it's really just it's energy that we perceive to be light. It's just energy. Leo would be here, right? Leo would also be here. This is like when the sun is at its height and it's doing its maximum. Here's Cancer. It's interesting, actually, because all things beginning in Aries being considered where the torsion field begins. It's just archetypally a representation of where force, with all its potential, springs from. So if you're measuring an event in time, you're always going to begin with Aries. And oddly enough, we always consider Aries to be 6 o'clock. As Mr. Bonacci in his astrotheology highlights, Aries is always 6 o'clock. It's the time of Aries, which is also the time of the spring. It's the equinox. And it's here. And from the position of Aries, again, it's archetypally just the beginning of a measurement of the force of something. So people charged with the power of Aries, or with a heavy affinity for the archetype of Aries, tend to represent an energy signature that within itself contains the ability to achieve what the initiative to achieve what it intends to do. See, this sine wave intends to complete itself. It's just a measurement of force completing itself. And if you consider the photon to be self-aware, well then by its process of completing itself, it is aware of what it's doing. It actually holds to an actual pattern that it is aware of. That this is an intelligently constructed pattern. From the position of 0 degrees, it sees the work it must do. So, everybody knows, if you know an Aries, they tend to be very, not necessarily volatile, but they can be violent. They're charged with power. They're charged with the initiative to get things done. They may not complete what they need to do. They may be extremely impulsive, but what matters is they are an energetic representation of the photon that is expressing itself in a way that reminds us that it has, am I saying that right? It's expressing itself in a way to depict the potential of the atom, the raw potential, the power of the photon, or the power of the atom to build, to achieve, to go forth, to emit electricity, to actually accomplish a task, to lead the force, lead the charge, to get things done. It can be a very egotistical thing because, from the singularity, you get the emission of the force, and it draws down the power of the singularity into time and space to achieve a thing. So people who are Aries, they are always defenders or warriors or knights. They lead the charge. They make the decision. They are self-motivated, right? And they're fire. So fire is a quality where there's fission. There is a process where there's flux, a state of atomic flux or electromagnetic flux, where something is in a state of disrest. It's chaotic. It wants to move. It needs to go. It can't sit still. And then, of course, you have, from the position of Aries, you have Cancer, which is this house here. You also have Taurus. Taurus is the arc. It gives us the third, from Aries to Taurus, it gives us the actual 30 degrees. It is the arc of this covenant. This covenant represents the bandwidth that we live in. It's a covenant by God to keep us safe from the harm of higher frequencies, the volatility of space. We live in a bubble where we aren't affected by much of the prevailing weather, the destructive weather of these neutron stars and these. We see their light, but thankfully we're far enough away for them to not influence us. So Taurus gives us the arc of the torsion. That is the Taurus is the bull. It's the power of the bull that gives us the torsion, or the arc that allows us to measure the amplitude of this sine wave, right? By being 30 degrees, continuing along with a continuous path of 30 degrees, right? Creates a perfect circle, but here it creates a perfect sine wave. So that is the arc of Taurus, and that is the arc of the covenant. And here, that's Gemini, and I can go into that another time, but here is really interesting because from here to here, you actually get a 90-degree angle. This represents the rib of Atom. You get Cancer, Cancer being the is the birthplace of the moon. It guards the heart, tends to refer to the mother in a chart, or the feminine aspect of a person's psyche, or the reflective aspect of their psyche, as the sun is the projective and the aware aspect. The moon is the reflective, and that being the chest area guards the heart of the it's the crab, right? It guards the heart, which is the sun, which is Leo. But from here to here, you get a nice 90-degree angle, which is one of the strongest structures in geometry. You get that 90-degree angle, and that represents security. It is the rib of this atomic flow. So it is the rib of Adam. You actually, this here represents Eve, but like I said, I can go into that another time. But it's the rib of Adam, represents the security, the emotional security of moving energy on the 90-degree angle, which is the secure angle, and there is a feminine quality to it for various reasons. Leo, I'll go into that another time. Well, apparently I continued on with the explanation. I wrote this actually like some months ago, so I really don't recall what was written in it. So if I sound surprised, it's not because I'm reading it for the first time. I actually am reading it for the first time. I never did any editing with this thing. I just, what came to mind, I just wrote it down, and that was that. Because I was really trying to hurry up and put together a body of, of things I could use to do a mystery school through. I wanted to do astrology readings and provide those readings to people, but I realized my depth of astrology, and because of the way I see it, tends to be a bit different. I don't explain things in the mumbo-jumbo way that some people are prefer. And, I say mumbo-jumbo lightly because I prefer it that way also. But, realistically, it's difficult for people who aren't spiritual-minded to really wrap their minds around this because it requires a measure of faith. A willingness to step outside of what you accept as true, what you've been given as true, what you can see, so that you can broaden your perspective of what's possible, and that's very, very important. So, I was talking about Leo here, seen as 12 o'clock, marks the beginning of the summer on the calendar, and represents the heart being the source of our power. We possess all of the same energetic centers as the solar system. The position of the energetic powers of the solar system imprint themselves onto our DNA when we're born and we take our first breath. It begins our atomic clock. The position begins our atomic clock, and we grow and evolve. As we grow and evolve, we play out the will and intent of our genetic blueprints and the energetic blueprints. The beat of the heart marks the rhythm of all processes in the body, just as it is with the sun. There's an atomic flow that's marked by it's the position of the sun. We mark our time by the position of the sun in the sky. As a measurement of its beat, as sort of the EKG wave patterns give us the measurement of time as its energy is pulsed to the rest of the body. And I was talking about the heart here. The EKG wave pattern is a symbol of frequency, also known as a sine wave. So, I think I covered the sine wave pretty well here, but I'm not sure what I wrote. Shows us the frequency or the rhythm of a force as it makes its way through a form. It's a model showing the measurements of the evolution of a force. It can measure the force of a vibration through matter, which gives us light frequency. It can measure the impact of waves rippling across the surface of a still pool of water. It can measure the vibration of force traveling through the ground, or even radio waves moving through air, which is water in a gaseous form. On a two-dimensional graph, it appears as waves, but if you can imagine that waves move in more directions than we can see, creating ripples beyond the time and space we understand, you can imagine it from various angles. A sine wave begins at a position and ends at another, in time before it dies. But before it dies, it completes a circuit of looping patterns which are showing us the basic atomic nature of its evolution through time. So it can ultimately be said to be a single event in time. Sine wave shows us how time is created by events that take place within a matrix of possibilities. Time can only be viewed from the inside of a matrix where possibilities are playing out. On a three-dimensional graph, we see how these waves are truly moving through time and space as we understand it, as a collapsing, undulation of force expressing an intent or potential. In quantum physics, they use the sine wave to understand how the particle exists simultaneously as both the particle and the wave. This is a conundrum which has scientists stumped because they do not understand that as a force splits time by creating an event, it carries the desire to collapse back into its potential from the waveform once it dies. It wants to move back into a state of inertness. Because energy is aware enough to possess a desire, and because it's never technically created or destroyed, only transmuted by the force it carries, the desire is the force that carries it back to the womb of creation. So they want to know about love, and they're all searching for the Higgs boson, this God particle that supposedly collapses time. It brings matter together, holds matter together. There's supposedly this one particle that, due to its density, its magnetism, it actually holds atoms together, holds particles in a state of homeostasis. It's not true. It's just the tendency for matter to collapse back into infinity, back into potential, back into inertness, death, Sheol, a state of not non-duality. It's not moving. It isn't polarized by vibration. It wants to remain still, and when it is, it goes dark. It doesn't contain heat the same way we understand it. It takes on a totally different form, but it's transmuted. It's neither in a state of life nor death, as life and death require motion. They require action. They require heat. They require a cycle. This exists outside of time. So matter is always trying to move back into its original state. So because of that, it, once stirred into motion and life by force, is always seeking a way for it to collapse back into that raw potential. And because of that, there is a natural magnetism. There's a natural intention for it to recombine with its original state, its original where it was fractured from, and that is singularity. Like you think about cells in our body. Like, what do they see when they look up at the night sky? Think about the plane of existence they live on. They live in a plane of existence where, if a cell fell off of your body, it's probably not going to fall to its doom, hit the ground, and die from the force of the impact, right? It perceives time and space differently. So if a cell ever left your body, it would probably disappear. It wouldn't exist long because it can't live outside of that environment. It's like us in space. We don't perceive it the way that we're intended to. A cell wouldn't perceive the outside the way it's intended to. It's inside of our body is as we are to the inside of this planet, as this planet is to the inside of this matrix. If it ever moved beyond the reach of Saturn and the sun, something would happen to the neutrinos. It would be an influx of these new neutrons, and it would probably destroy matter. It would eradicate. It couldn't hold itself together. Things would just, it would probably just like dissipate or break apart. Or even, who knows, it would probably grow even heavier and collapse into a clump of dead green. I don't know. It's pure speculation. The idea is that there's a natural magnetism that is always imposing, and it's not from the outside, it's actually from the inside. It's drawing into itself, just as a singularity, and at the center of our universe, there's this, or the center of the galaxy, there's this, black hole that's drawing matter back in on itself. It's the same process. That is the gravity we're looking for to explain love, to explain the natural tendency of things to achieve a unified state, a state of singularity and unity. So Where was I? The desire is the force that carries it back to the womb of creation, Tiamat, chaos. If you can picture the sine wave as a circuit of the measured vibration, you see the cycle of its journey through time in circular form. The wave-particle duality is simply Aries, the singularity, or what is given birth to from the singularity in the form of a zodiac. It is the measurement of a single event in time, just as our seconds, minutes, hours, days, seasons, years, etc. From the inside of this matrix, we may perceive the building blocks of the singularity as events in time. All things within it are made of light, and the creation time by an event moves in cyclical form, which divides it along planes of perspective. If that was written in the right context. Let me pause it. So all things within it are made of light, and the creation of time by an event moves in cyclical form, which divides it along planes of perspective, depending on the angle, which angle you're viewing it from. I'm not sure if I said that right. I just didn't feel right. And because all things in this matrix are living collections of its light. When I say collection, I mean it exists in a form where it is made of light, existing as different elements. Everything is really just it's the elements, it's the states of matter given a homeostatic material form. And that's what I mean when I say collections of its light material. We perceive light with perspective. We perceive light with perspective just the same as the photon does. From the position of a photon, if it were beaming light and shining it across a rock or a wall, on the other side of that would exist what is outside of its perspective, and therefore by its perspective be considered evil. So here I say perspective gives us duality, which gives us unity, as well as opposition, top and bottom, left and right, inside and out. It's the people with us and the people against us. The people on the other side of the wall we can't see, who are evil, and their ways are unbeknownst to us. So, there's a natural magnetism that's going to draw us to know what they're doing, because by our fear, we're lured into magnetism. Also by our love, our intent, we're lured into a sense of magnetism by our perspective. It also gives us light and shadow, good and evil, the will of the God and the will of the devil, expansion and contraction, and much more. So a particle in waveform is experiencing a moment in time, which is why we're able to utilize the zodiacal angular perspective to understand how angles of light made by imposing electromagnetic forces influence our own light matrix on a very subtle level. And here someone actually did a breakdown of the different colors and how the frequencies pertain to different colors. Really quite interesting. But this, and based on the frequencies, you can actually gauge these frequencies on a sine wave pattern. You can see based on the angle of light, what the type of frequency it's creating or emitting, or if you were to wrap, for instance, if you were to measure a spectrum of light, the rainbow, you take you wrap a, what am I trying to say? If you were to take a rainbow and then try and measure it or quantify it, you would come up with a list of numerical values that would equate to its frequencies. That's the way we would quantify a rainbow. We would get frequencies, and if you took an entire range, the Roy G. Biv spectrum, you would actually get something that sort of, it would look like this, but you would be wrapping the rainbow around to show how it begins. It's just a measurement of it, and I'm at a loss at the moment, lacking the brain power to significantly describe why, but it sort of goes without saying. You know anything about physics, and I'm not here to teach the basics of physics, but to explain from a physics perspective how we actually extrapolate, energy, definition from these energies, definition from colors, definition from numbers that all correlate and give us values that we can use to understand the rest of the universe with, understand the workings of creation and how one thing relates to another. So here we have this breakdown of emotions, right? And this isn't to say that this is perfectly accurate, but, I'm sure based on your favorite color, you could probably fill in each of these colors with different values, different emotional values to say how you feel about each one. You may love blue, and to you, blue may be the best color, but there is an actual archetypal value for each of these colors, and because color does impose on our subconscious a feeling of a mood change, a frequency, or it comes with symbols or symbolism that we use to perceive the rest of the world and communicate with one another through colors and through music. I can play a beautiful piece of music, and you can have never heard that music before, but with an appreciation of music, you can know that the music is beautiful. We know that the sun is yellow, and the sun being the most abundant source of light and truth, and it represents love and all these wonderful things that come in the summertime. It is essentially what we equate to yellow. So, yellow here represents what they're saying, curiosity, wonder, awe, and that can technically be considered. These are things that, majority of people will probably agree on, but this is just to serve as an understanding for how the numerical values of frequency give us color, how that color corresponds to emotion, and how we can take that emotion and correlate it to the very same graph that we measure frequency by to give us archetypal values. So we have the breakdown of that here, and I'm fairly certain this is accurate. This goes from, this is Roy G. Biv broken down in a way that I find I can't recall who actually did this graph here, but it was based on the zodiac, and I really just lined it up so that each one of these colors fell on one of the signs, and I noticed very interestingly that as Aries is red, obviously being the warrior, Aries corresponding with the god Mars, right, being of war, of chaos, strife, conflict, but also of passion, lust, intent, power, and focus. Then you also have Leo here, Leo being the birthplace of the sun, or the place of exaltation of the sun, carries the color yellow. So to me, it seems that this is fairly accurate. But what I also found, interestingly enough, is that you have this triplicity, this trinity of fire powers here. Red, yellow, and blue are, interestingly, the primary colors. And the primary colors, give you, from the primary colors, you can really sort of draft the rest of the spectrum. The primary colors are, they're primary because, they are the most important. They give you the rest of the spectrum, essentially. But what's interesting here is that we see that they all fall on the fire signs. And that, to me, if you get into any sort of physics and learn the way engines work, they require a torque that's wired into a delta or a Y phase pattern, which is an even distribution of their electromotive force that gives the engine torque. It gives it torsion. So it's like these fire qualities here are actually giving this field torsion. That's just part of my work, is the things that I'm extrapolating from my understanding of physics and learning it, relearning that physics through the veil of astrology. And the three fires, you get three phases of fire, and these fires are fires of different intensity. And you really think that this is actually, you got three fires. You have Sagittarius being the blue flame, and there actually is a blue fire. There's a frequency that carries a blue flame, or rather a blue flame that carries a frequency. You know, HVAC technicians, when they there's a piece, a thermocouple, or there's a piece that measures, it's like a heat sensor, but it measures millivolts of electricity based on the heat that passes over its metal rod. There's a metal rod, and when a fire touches it, it lets the rest of the system know that the fire is going, and that's what keeps your furnace blazing. Is that if you ever pulled that thing out of the phase, out of the control circuit, it would no longer sense the flame moving across it. It would no longer send those millivolts of electricity back to the control board to let it know to continue running. It would just kill the circuit. So Sagittarius is a blue flame, and blue flames we know are incredibly powerful. Sagittarius ironically represents sort of a collective fire. It equates to higher learning, foreign travel. It is a fire of collective intensity, a fire like an inferno. It's a fire raging out of control, but it's vast and powerful. But it doesn't come with the same potential to initiate itself as, say, Aries. Aries is the initiating fire. Leo is like equilibrium fire that sort of shines down for all. But it's all based on perspective and all the archetypes, and there's so many things you can extrapolate by values of these. The seasons that they it's the photon again. It's just building all of this, and it's all based on the perspective of something designed this. And it's so intricately built that it must be utilizing something that is able to see from all possible angles to intellectualize what it needs to continue creating, to provide the instructions to the rest of creation, so that numerically it all breaks down. I mean, that's why we even have science, is because there is a numerical value to all of this. So as we are in possession of our own corporate body of electromagnetic signatures, we are always subject to the prevailing winds of change made by larger electromagnetic forces. Light moves light. It all happens by resonance. We have these electromagnetic, these centers in our body, which we call the chakras, and the bands of light that move and permeate all things in this matrix. Also, they interface with our electromagnetic centers. And everything that stirs or changes the frequency of each of these bands has an influence, by proximity over our electromagnetic centers. So, light moves light. Awareness engages awareness. Force will always create a change. We play our lives out as a collection of energetic potentials in a singular form, just as particles do, just as atoms do, just as the sun does, as the solar system, and as the galaxy. The zodiac gives us a display of our energetic blueprint as we are bound by time beneath the firmament of light. And the firmament is really just it's the bandwidth that we live in, the bandwidth that all things are created in. All things fall under the firmament. The firmament was the rainbow, right? It's the Roy G. Biv spectrum. And the Bible was marked by the covenant of the rainbow, which appears once man is reborn into a new world after an inundation of primordial water from the womb of creation, his mother, Gaia. Gaia in Noah's case. So there was a fall deeper into matter. It was just what the story of the Bible is actually trying to explain. There was a fall into matter beneath the Roy G. Biv spectrum, of the covenant of the rainbow. Light creates according to the archetypal value of these of the colors of the rainbow. Color is light moving at a specific frequency, and I think I'm just being redundant here. Color gives us archetypal emotion, archetypal behavior, values, etc. And all things we see the values expressed by the colors they represent. Colors break down the value system from one side of the duality to the other. Photons arrange themselves according to that system. So creation is always according to the symbolic value of symbolic value of the colors we assign. Goodness gracious, I was written so horribly. Frequency and emotional value. Remember, light is living and it's aware. So again, with astrology, you have this idea, this breakdown of the luminaries, of the different prevailing forces in the universe, and how they are channeling the light, what they're doing with it. And based on what these forces are doing with the light, we understand what they're also doing with the light through us. So we are channeling these luminaries, these greater bodies of power, of these archetypal forces that came together to create these bodies of light we refer to as the planets. They're not physical things in the same way, I mean, and then they exist in a form where, we can see them based on our sensory range. We can see they exist as spheres in time and space, but they're doing something else. They're only spheres because we are viewing them in 3 dimensions, or 4, or whatever. But in reality, if you could view them, you may actually see something that's actually moving according to its own will. It may be stretching its influence across time and space. There may be parts of it that are, in a way, living and communicating with one another, but in a veiled way, so that we don't recognize what they're doing, because that would really just disturb all life on this planet. If we knew that the sun was about to emit an electromagnet, a solar flare, but we didn't know that the planet planned on dodging it or stopping it. We might be sitting there, staring at the sun, waiting on this blast of solar ejecta to annihilate us, without understanding that it's in communication with the planet, and that it has no intention really of destroying us, because it's all timed. And this is all hypothetical, who knows, right? We don't know what they're doing, but they're communicating, and we're seeing that because we see the uncertainty. What term am I looking for? There's this randomness to it all that escapes us. It eludes us. When we start viewing what the sun's doing, since we started viewing what the sun's doing, all we could think of was, oh my God, one day it's just going to annihilate all life on this planet. But it's been here for billions of years, and we've never experienced, as far as we've known, the world being destroyed or burned up in a solar flare. We can speculate that it happened to Mars or such, but it's really it's quite improbable that we live in the time that we're going to die by a solar flare. It may reset us, but there's a communication taking place. There's a communication and intelligence that's taking place between these luminaries. And just as they're self-aware outside of us, they're also self-aware through us. In astrology, and just to give you a brief rundown, like the different planets, Mercury governs communication. It's how we function as vessels for the moving or redistribution of information. So people who have a strong mercurial affinity or strong placements, say in the planet sign Gemini, or the position, the house, the 3rd house of Gemini, may find that they function as vessels for communication very well. They are good speakers, or they may like to do a lot of traveling because they like to pass information around. They may just be the messenger boy. They may enjoy a life as a mailman, right? The whole idea being that they are they're movers of information. That's Mercury. You have the sun, which is abundant with its power. It's people who are Leos or have a strong sun affinity, or even the sun in your natal chart is where you show up. It's where you show yourself. It's how you show off to the rest of the world. It's you with all your highest values and the things that make you passionate. It's how you're actually demonstrating who you are, devoid of what you don't want everybody else to see. Because there's a dark side of the sun. It's the opposite side that we don't see, right? By our perspective, we viewing the sun, we're always seeing the side of it. Maybe that's not a good way to explain it, but by our perspective, when we view the sun, it always makes us feel good. So there's a natural quality to the sun that it always carries a sense of truth and honesty and clarity to us. with the sun. That's why the sun is used with symbols that make you feel good. They're used with symbols of power, symbols of authority, symbols of the highest good, the highest truth, because archetypally they imprint on the subconscious mind these ideas. They convey these ideas. That's why these countries, they always utilize the sun as a symbol of their own authority, of their jurisdiction, their supremacy, their what's the term I'm looking for? Sovereignty. The sun is sovereign. There's nothing higher than the sun in this system until the moon eclipses it, but it's only temporary, right? The moon tends to represent your reflective nature. So if the sun is your ego, or the mind, the part of you that you use to engage the rest of the world with, the moon tends to be the reflection of that. It's the part of you that you engage your inner world with. It's the part of you that wants to nurture your inner world, your emotions. It's where everything goes to be processed, that does not fall into the light of consciousness, the light of awareness of other people. It's the unprocessed, things that need to be filtered under nurturing circumstances. They're private matters, so there's a reflective process, and these things tend to come out at night, or when you're doing things that don't require you to engage the rest of the world. It's your emotional state, like in the business, in the office. Which is why women tend to be, up until recently, considered to be second, sort of take on a secondary role in the office, because it was always a place where we considered to, we left our emotions, we left the things that that forced us to focus on our emotions outside of those doors. We didn't want to address our emotional state at the office, because then it brings in sort of the color of law and the color of self-governance, where it becomes a sort of a mess, where you're no longer allowed to engage from a position of objectivity, but then there is this self-awareness that's required for you to be aware of your own subjectivity and aware of when you're crossing the line. So it's absolutely necessary that we incorporate both the sun and the moon in the workplace, or the masculine and feminine principles, and even respect women in the workplace, because that is where our humanity is stored. It's our emotions. You have Venus, which is, depending on the qualities. If you consider the qualities of your what you think of on a day-to-day basis, you take on these energetic qualities based on your habits and your day-to-day I think I'm running over my time. I'm gonna go ahead and pause it here and do another video.